and we are all excited. We want to thank all of our folks for being here. So without further ado, I'd like to kick it off with a fireside chat. A.G. Holder is an internationally respected lawyer and voting rights champion who, in 2009, was appointed by Barack Obama, then President Barack Obama, to become the 82nd Attorney General of the United States. He is not only the third longest serving Attorney General in our nation's history, but he is the first African American to serve in this role. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Attorney General Eric Holder.
How are you doing, sir?
Yeah.
Morning.
Good morning. So, we're here to talk about voting rights at the Voting Rights Brain Trust, and I think the biggest threat to voting rights is redistricting. So today we're going to talk about how 60 years from Selma, we still are fighting the same battle for the equal right to vote. Now it's about fair representation, and there's no bigger threat to us than the redistricting. Can you just tell us how redistricting this time around is different from redistricting in the prior? And then tell us what you've been doing since you, what you're doing about it, and since you've been in.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you so much for having me here today, and I'm glad to see you all here. This is, I think, an extremely important topic. The right to vote is the thing that I think really distinguishes the United States from so many other countries and makes us, when we do it right, makes this nation exceptional. You know, we're supposed to redistrict every 10 years, and you do it after a census happens, and the year after that, the redistricting occurs. What's different this time is that a number of states, as a result of the direction being given to them by President Trump, are in the process of doing a redistricting mid-cycle.
Yeah.
The first state to do it was Texas. And they have drawn maps that they think will give them maybe an additional 5 Republican seats. And they've done it in such a way that it has its most negative impact on communities of color, Hispanics and African Americans in the state. So we are in the process of, we have a lawsuit against what was already a gerrymandered map in Texas. They've now placed a gerrymander on top of a gerrymander, and so that lawsuit goes to its next stage in early October. Hopefully we'll get a decision relatively soon. But we can talk about that gerrymander, but in some ways that's a granular way to look at it. What this really is an attack on our democracy.
Absolutely.
Because what this does is it allows politicians to choose their voters instead of citizens choosing who their elected officials should be. And that's inconsistent with who we say we are as a country.
Nation. Yes. You know, you said most recently in an interview, gerrymandering is a threat to our democracy because it gives politicians, as you said, an opportunity to pick their own voters. I think that most people understand the importance of redistricting, but I don't think that they really understand how it allows us to have fair representation. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the origins of redistricting and what it's supposed to do, and as you just said, what it's currently doing, we know, is voter suppression?
Yeah, I mean, redistricting is based on the notion of, you know, one person, one vote, and each congressional district has, you know, roughly, I don't know, a couple 100,000 people per district.
700,000.
700,000 per district. And so you're supposed to have districts that are drawn in such a way, ideally, that don't favor one party or the other. Gerrymandered districts are drawn in such a way that you almost guarantee that one party is going to win. And Republicans, after the 2010 census and in the 2011 redistricting, really had a thing called Project Red Map, where they really went to town and they just gerrymandered a whole bunch of states. And we've been, I'm the chairman of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, and we've been trying to unwind those gerrymanders. And the impact of gerrymandering is this. If you're in a district if you're a Republican in a district where you know you can't lose in a general election, the only thing you're really worried about is a primary challenge.
Yep.
And that pushes you further and further to the right because you don't want to have a primary challenger. It also means that you're not going to reach across the aisle to work with your Democratic counterpart because that's seen as a sign of weakness and invites a primary challenge. And as a result of people not reaching across the aisle to talk to one another, not much gets done, which means that Congress is not as effective as it might be. And then people get cynical about the ineffectiveness of government. So gerrymandering is, I was doing something the other day, a podcast, and the host said gerrymandering is like a cancer on our democracy. And I think that's not an overstatement.
Yeah. Well, what can we do about it in the sense that we know that the Lawyers Committee, the redistricting committee that you're in charge of, are in the courts every day. What do you think is the biggest threat to your ability to win those lawsuits, and what will be the effect if you don't win those lawsuits?
You know, it's interesting. We've done pretty well at the district court level. We've done well at the Court of Appeals level with regard to gerrymandering cases. The Supreme Court has been a little tougher to crack. They had a decision, the Rucho decision, where they decided that partisan gerrymandering cases could not be brought in federal courts. Now, this is after state courts, lower federal courts had dealt with partisan gerrymandering cases, you know, pretty effectively. But
and that's why Texas could just come in and redo their maps mid-year, is because of that lawsuit that said that, you know, the Supreme Court's not going to touch state gerrymandering.
Right. I mean, if you look at the Texas representatives, state representatives who were in the process of putting this gerrymander together, they were very open about the fact that, well, they would admit this is a partisan gerrymander. They wanted to make the record as clear as they could to say that, you know, it's a partisan gerrymander, knowing that that means that the Supreme Court says you can't get federal court involvement. They couldn't say it was a racial gerrymander or that it had a racial impact,
exactly,
because that puts them under then the under the auspices of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So it's an awful thing to see, but this is a political power grab at the expense of communities of color, not only in Texas, but in other parts of the country as well.
You know, obviously you had a little bit of foresight because you started I'm not sure if my mic is on. Obviously, thank you. Obviously, you had a little bit of a running start because after the Obama administration ended, we established a redistricting committee. Can you tell everybody about that and where things stand now? I have to tell you, the lawyers that you have are amazing, and we're very grateful in Alabama that we won the Milligan case, and we owe it a lot to the LDF, to NAACP Legal Defense Fund, as well as to the amazing team that you put together. So tell us a little bit about how you're fighting back.
Well, one thing I will say, the Milligan case is one of our one of the things I'm most proud of. And yeah, we did a lot of great work, but you were also responsible for our success. You know, it was, I remember speaking with you and speaking to other members when we were thinking about bringing these cases. And I'll be honest, you know, some people were a little hesitant because, you know, people get familiar with how their districts are drawn, and you never hesitated.
I'm from Selma. And if anyone knows the importance of the right to vote, I know my district that brought us the Voting Rights Act needs to be the district that also brings fair representation and restores the voting rights.
Right. No, and that's exactly right. And, you know, your focus was on, as it is for us, on fairness. The National Democratic Redistricting Committee was formed up in 2017. And we've been in operation since then, brought a number of lawsuits around the country, have supported candidates at the state level who will pledge to not engage in gerrymandering, to do things in a fair way. And we've also tried to raise the consciousness of people around the country so that they understand the pernicious impact that gerrymandering has, whether it's partisan or racial. And we've been, as I said, you know, fairly successful. When we started out, Democrats, in order to get to 50-50 in the House of Representatives, had to overperform their Republican counterparts by 20%.
20%, y'all.
20%. That was 2017. We've now reduced that number to less than 2%. And so we have what has been described now as the fairest congressional maps in decades. Now, fairest, but not totally fair yet. By comparison, we're doing better, but we're not yet at the place where we need to be. There are still gerrymanders that need to be unwound. Texas, Wisconsin, Ohio, Florida, North Carolina. There's still a lot of places where we have to, devote our attention.
So the Milligan case really did say, first of all, that the Voting Rights Act is very much alive and well, and it also reiterated the importance of Section 2. Can you talk about Section 2 and whether or not that threat by the Supreme Court in the Louisiana case, how that could unravel as well?
Yeah, I mean, the Voting Rights Act was eviscerated in the Shelby County case in 2013.
I know you don't like Shelby County versus Holder.
It's Shelby
Notice
County versus Holder, but we don't ever put my name on that case. I don't want to be associated with that. So I just call it the Shelby County case. And that took out the ability of the Justice Department to pre-clear things that were being proposed in covered jurisdictions, which left us as our main tool now, Section 2, which deals with whether or not the power of communities are diluted. Their political power is diluted by things that are proposed. We've used Section 2 successfully in Alabama, in Louisiana. Alabama has about a 27% of the voting age population in Alabama is African American. And
Louisiana's even more.
Even more. And so Alabama, if you do the math, should have opportunity zones for African Americans to elect 2 representatives of their choice. But before it only had been 1. And now, as a result of our victory, there are 2. There are now arguments before the Supreme Court coming out of Louisiana challenging the constitutionality of Section 2, using arguments that were used when the act was passed back in 1965 and saying that it's racially inappropriate. It's racial discrimination to take race into consideration, which Section 2 does when it looks at what's going on. Other courts up to now have looked at this and kind of given it the back of the hand and said, that's absurd. The Supreme Court, Milligan's only 2 years old, and said that Section 2 was viable, gave us the extra seat in Alabama. And I'm very concerned about what this Supreme Court is going to do with this latest challenge that historically has been rejected. So we'll see. The case is going to be argued, I think, in December, and so we'll have a decision.
I think it's closer than that, isn't it? Like October, November.
October, okay. So we'll get a decision, relatively soon.
Yeah, and that decision, do you expect to be a positive one or not? I mean, I have to say that when we went to the Milligan case and I heard the oral argument, I wasn't really sure how they were going to end up. I knew that the lawyers had articulated a really compelling legal argument as to why Section 2 was still viable. And Alabama, with 27% African-American population, should have more than one. We have 7 members of Congress in Alabama, and that's 14% of the vote if only one congressperson can actually get elected by minority voters. And so we were confident that we had a good case, but we weren't necessarily confident that we would win. And how do you pair Milligan with the Supreme Court 2 years later in Louisiana deciding to just grant cert on this one issue about race? It's pretty scary.
It's scary. It worries me a great deal. But the reality is that this iteration of the Supreme Court is no friend of voting rights. I mean, it's just a fact. Everything from Citizens United to the gerrymandering case in Rucho. The Milligan case was, in some ways, a pleasant surprise, but it also was the right decision. It'll be interesting to see what the court does here. I mean, just 2 years ago, this same court applied Section 2 to Alabama. How are you now going to say that 2 years later something has happened and you're now going to find Section 2 unconstitutional? Having said that, I worry about what the court is going to do. So we'll have to see.
I have to also tell you that Alabama is still litigating, the state of Alabama is still appealing the Milligan case. And I think that what has helped, the difference between Alabama and Louisiana, Alabama was told, the state legislature was told to draw a majority-minority district or something close to an opportunity district. And they met for a week and they did nothing. I mean, they went from 30% black representation to like 37, 36, and they did not do what the court said. I think the court was furious because of that and had to have a independent, judge to actually draw the demographer to draw the district. Now, in Louisiana, having watched Alabama, they actually drew a district that now has two African Americans in that state. We have Cleo Fields and we have Troy Carter. And I have to tell you that what's at risk is that seat that Cleo holds, I think. And I think that the irony is that they only want to talk about Section 2 with respect to the race issue and whether or not it violates the 14th Amendment. If we lose that case, what does that mean for the Voting Rights Act? Is it totally gone?
You know, it's hard to look at a Voting Rights Act without the preclearance authority, without Section 2, and to say that it would still be an effective statute. We'll be as creative as we can to look at whatever remains and to see how we might continue to use it. But the two biggest tools that the Voting Rights Act gave us, or two of the biggest tools, would have been removed if there was an adverse decision by the Supreme Court. Section 2, when you look at this history of racially polarized voting in the states where we have been successful, Justice Kavanaugh has said, he talks about, and Sandra Day O'Connor talked about this with regard in other things. He said, well, are these things going to go on forever? There should be some kind of time limit. And always
like there's a time limit on racism.
Well, and that's exactly the point. It's kind of like you're looking at the length of time with regard to the remedy without looking at the duration of the harm that the remedy is supposed to deal with. You all found 2 years ago that there was racial discrimination in the way in which those lines were drawn in Alabama. So it's not like racism is gone or that inappropriate racial considerations are not being used. How can you then say that there's not a need for the Voting Rights Act? The genius of the Voting Rights Act, the crown jewel of the Civil Rights Movement, is that it looked at America as it was and as it continues to be, slightly better, but as it continues to be, and came up with remedies to make the nation more fair.
So I know that Section 5 can be restored if Alabama, or Section 4, the covered jurisdictions, can be restored if the Congress acts. What the court said didn't say it was illegal, or they said that the fact that we had the same 16 jurisdictions year after year, or reauthorization after reauthorization, was the problem, and noted that there was an African American in the White House as president. And so is there a way that we in Congress, so if we come up with a modern day formula to determine which states discriminate, and then we could really get Section 4 back, right? I mean, that's the point. But my question really is, what can we in Congress do if if Section 2 goes away?
Well, we'll have to look at what the opinion says, but I mean, if the court determined that Section 2 was unconstitutional because it violated the Equal Protection Clause, I know whatever, it would be hard to figure out how to legislate around that. But I'm sure there are ways in which a focused Congress, being creative, could come up with something that maybe not is exactly like Section 2, but would give us a tool to deal with, inappropriate racial considerations. It's an interesting thing. You'd like to think that as John Roberts said in the Shelby County case, America has changed. And it has. We're in a fundamentally different place now than we were in 1965, but we're not yet at the place where we're supposed to be. And so this pullback that we're seeing in so many different areas, whether it's, DEI, voting rights, all of these
rewriting our history.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about, pulling back from, I think, the pro-democracy impulses that have guided this nation when it has been at its best.
So what can we do about it? Let's end on a high note. Where are the opportunities, and what can we, we've talked about what legislators can do, but what can our communities do? How can activists help in this endeavor?
Yeah, I think we as individuals have to ask ourselves, what is it that I can do? Dr. King said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And that's cool, except that the arc doesn't bend on its own. It only bends when people like us, when people like you, put their hands on the arc and pull it towards justice. And so the question, so I think the question that each of us has to ask ourselves is, what can I do to pull that arc towards justice? And what I always say to people is, figure out what's in your wheelhouse. What is it that you feel comfortable doing? Demonstrating, certainly. Well, the first thing, voting.
Yes.
You got to vote.
Every election.
There are no excuses. If you don't vote, you're dishonoring the legacy of people who sacrificed, gave their lives, so that we would have opportunities to participate in democracy that they did not. So voting is like, that's moral obligation one. But then beyond that, the question is, well, how can I be active? And I guess demonstrating, being in touch with your state and local legislators, your congressmen, congresswomen, to talk about things that you want to see done. Get involved, get engaged in the political process. This is not a non-contact sport. You just can't watch television and yell at Fox News or something, or, agree with MSNBC, whatever. You got to be doing more than that.
Got to be engaged.
Got to be engaged. And it may be, contributing money to organizations that are engaged in the process, supporting candidates who are going to be involved in the process. But find out, what is it that you can do to be a part of a process that's going to make this nation better? Well,
I would be remiss if I didn't ask if you have any comments about the current Justice Department. You were the third longest serving.
We don't have enough time.
But the fact that the prosecutors are leaving, the fact that it's been weaponized by this executive, it's really troubling. And I can only imagine you're the third longest serving AG, and I think you left an amazing legacy. So your thoughts about what's going on now and what can we do about it?
I mean, it's disturbing to see what's happening to the Justice Department. This Attorney General, this President, thinks that the Justice Department is staffed with people who are the President's lawyers, as opposed to the way I viewed it. The Justice Department was staffed with people who were the lawyers for the people. And, with the Comey indictment yesterday, based on little or nothing, all the career people said you can't bring the case. They bring in some person who's never been a U.S. attorney, she goes in, presents the case herself. I mean, it's breathtaking to see what's going on. And the movement by the Justice Department to switch sides in the Texas case. Again, this is all about the perpetuation of their hold on power and using the Justice Department as a tool to hold on to what I consider, the illegitimate power that they have. And so, again, this gets back to us fighting.
And voting.
Because when we fight, we win. That really is a reality. People, they tried to suspend, Jimmy Kimmel. People expressed concern about that, talk about boycotts and all kinds of things, and suddenly he's back on. We should not think that simply because these folks have power that means that they're always going to win. They're certainly going to win. They're certainly going to win if they're not challenged. If we don't engage in the fight, they're certainly going to win. And so I understand we could have doubts. We could have questions about our ability to win, in the same way that I'm sure John Lewis, Dr. King, Diane Nash must have had questions about whether or not they would have the ability to rip down a system of American apartheid. But they fought through those doubts, stayed engaged, stayed focused, and ultimately were successful. And I think we will be as well if we are prepared to fight, if we're prepared to be engaged, if we're willing to put our hands on that arc and pull it towards justice.
I think what a great ending for this fireside chat. Will you give a round of applause to my forever Attorney General, Eric Holder?